Chapter 3, Youthful Years. In 1913, Lloyd graduated from Benton Harbor College from the literary department. He was the only boy in that department. He was especially interested in dramatics and public speaking and had excellent training under the direction of Mrs. Carrie West, who at one time was on the legitimate stage. Her students were drilled in elocution, as it was called in those days, and Lloyd had the leading male part in several class plays. He developed a pleasing speaking voice with clear and accurate enunciation. His orations were polished and to the point, and he learned to speak fluently without notes. All this training was to be of great value to him later in life. Sometimes the readings were light and witty, and the young people at church were often entertained by his recitations. One of them, which he occasionally springs today on unsuspecting brides and grooms and their guests at rehearsal dinners during a dull moment, goes like this: "Wilt thou take her for thy pal, for better or for worse, to have, to hold, to fondly love, till hauled off by the hearse? Wilt thou have her way, consult her many wishes, build the fires every day, and help her wash the dishes? Wilt thou comfort and support her father and her mother, and Jiminy and Uncle John, 3 sisters and a brother?" By this time his face grew pale and lank, and through the chapel floor he sank and said, "I wilt." He always explains at the end of this recitation that the wedding vows have changed somewhat since their father's time, which brings forth chuckles. While at Benton Harbor College, Lloyd studied mathematics with Sidney C. Mitchell, who was a nephew of Dr. Edgecombe, the founder of the college. Dr. Edgecombe, who was twice given the offer to become president of the Michigan Agricultural College, now Michigan State University, was an eminent educator. In his teaching, he used to prophesy many things about the future of science, which have already come true. Amen. He said that he believed that in the future a farmer would be on his back 40 and would hear his wife calling to him from the house, and that one would be able to see the person with whom he was talking over the telephone. He came to Benton Harbor in 1886 to be the superintendent of schools of the city. A few years later, he and Mr. Seeley McCord founded Benton Harbor College and Normal School. Many teachers were trained here. The school was first housed in a 2-story building at the northwestern corner of Columbus and Catalpa Avenues. It was later moved to Morton Hill, where a 3-story building was built overlooking the bluff. It was discontinued in 1915 upon Dr. Edgecombe's retirement. After Lloyd graduated in 1913, he had a great desire to further his education, but at this time there was not money enough to send him to college. So after the summer work was finished, he got a job as a clerk at Wallen's Brothers store on Pipestone Street, Benton Harbor. This was a sporting goods and hardware store. He continued his work through the winter of 1914, but the spring saw him back on the farm working side by side with Pa. Pa never had any other hired man or help, except from his daughters and the itinerant pickers who came during the harvesting of the field. There was always some work to be done on the farm, even after the harvest was over each year, and chores to be done every day. By the fall of 1914, Lloyd had accumulated enough money to go to college, so he enrolled in the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor in the literary department. But to his great disappointment, he was able to remain there only 3 months. He loved his studies and enjoyed his profs. But Pa was ill, yes, very ill, sicker than anyone realized. All that during autumn when he came in from the field or from the barn, Pa looked haggard and worn. He would throw himself down on the couch in the kitchen, utterly exhausted. Everyone was alarmed, and Ma more especially was distressed over his condition. He lost so much weight that winter that he was only a semblance of his own self by spring. He was not able to keep his food down, and during the long winter months they watched him grow weaker and weaker. At times he suffered great pain. The doctor from Benton Harbor drove out to see him every week, but his condition never improved. Ma and the girls took all the care of him, and occasionally Lloyd helped. He was only 58 years old when he died on the 19th of May, 1915. It was hard to part with him. He had made his children a good father, and had always been kind and considerate, a quiet, reserved person with a serious nature, coupled with a staunch faith in God. He was very human, and had been a true companion to his son. Now it was up to Lloyd to carry the burden of the farm and the needs of his family on his shoulders. There seemed to be no alternative but for him to remain at home. He was now 20 years old. In the fall of that same year, he was asked to teach a class of eighth grade boys at the First Baptist Church Sunday School in Benton Harbor. Lloyd kept that class for 6 years, building it up each year until it became one of the largest high school Sunday school classes in the city. The names on the roll of that class of young men, most of them only a few years younger than Lloyd, had familiar residents of Benton Harbor. Some, like Floyd Seal, Olaf Brieves, and George Dean, have passed on, but Clarence Cook, Forrest Freeman, Henry Woodruff, Roy and Parker Dukeshire, George Willis, and Emma Carlson are all still living. In the fall of that same year, he was asked to teach a class of 8th grade boys at First Baptist Church Sunday School in Benton Harbor. Oh wait, I already read that. Okay, the next thing. The family had joined this church after Pa's death. Lloyd did not realize it then, but this was all a part of God's plan for him. 5 years later, he was destined to be introduced to his future wife at the parsonage of the First Baptist Church of Benton Harbor. The next 2 summers after his father's death, Lloyd carried the load of the farm alone. This he did throughout the entire year of 1915 and the summer of 1916. During the intervening winter, he worked at Arthur Dixon's at a neighbor, digging a basement under Dixon's house in order to install a furnace. Then in the fall of that year, he felt a real urge to go into the ministry. Of course, this would mean that he would have to break the home ties and go back to college. He had felt this call the year after he graduated from Benton Harbor College when he was 20 years old, but nothing had seemed to come of it. What he didn't know then was that it would take him 40 years to attain his goal. The number 40 seems to have a great deal of significance in the Bible. This too was going to prove to have an important meaning for Lloyd. It would be 40 years before he would attain his soul's sincerest desire. He told his mother about his intention, and although she was pleased to have her son go into God's service, she was reluctant to lose him as her mainstay and support. However, after talking and praying about it for a long time, she finally consented to let him try it and see how they could get along. Consequently, in the fall of 1916, Lloyd enrolled in Kalamazoo College as a ministerial student. His family was not sure even yet that they could manage without him, so it was not an easy move for him to make. But the crops were all harvested and the fall work was nearly done, and it seemed right for him to go. His sister Vera learned how to milk the cow, and she promised to do the other chores so he might be free to go. Nonetheless, it was hard for Ma and his sisters to see him go, since they had come to lean on him so heavily. He therefore went off to college once more with apprehension and misgiving. Lloyd received a scholarship which paid his tuition, and he got a job in a restaurant known as the White Kitchen, which was not far from the college. It was near the Michigan Central Railroad station. Here he worked after school and nights, first washing dishes and later waiting on tables. Jobs were scarce, and he felt fortunate in securing this one. His hours were from 5 to 7 weekday nights, and from 10 at night until 3 o'clock in the morning on Saturdays and Sundays. He was only working for his board. Occasionally he would be given a small tip, usually a dime, but he did not get many. Every night he would take a sandwich back to his rooming house with him for breakfast the next day. At noon there was scarcely time for him to walk to the restaurant and back in time for classes. He ate most of his substantial meal at night after he got through work. Then he walked a mile to the house where he was rooming. Lloyd roomed with a young man from Benton Harbor named Vivian Tuttle. It sounded as if Lloyd were rooming with a girl. In fact, when Vivian had sent in his application that summer, his name had been put in the girls' file, and they had written a letter welcoming him into their midst. Poor Vivian was embarrassed, and the girls were bewildered. Lloyd still remembers a humorous incident about Vivian and Marion Dinsmore, who later became an instructor at Kalamazoo College. Both had girls' names, or so the boys thought, and they often made fun of them. In order to humiliate them because of this, during the freshman initiation, they hazed both young fellows and washed their hair in green paint and catsup. When Vivian got back to their room that night, it took Lloyd, who took pity on his roommate, several hours to get the paint out of Vivian's hair. Lloyd went to a drugstore and brought some turpentine, which he applied first. After most of the green, sticky substance was out of Vivian's hair, he scrubbed his head with a strong soap for 2 hours, lathering and rinsing over and over again. It was an experience neither of them ever forgot. Before the first semester was over, Lloyd received a letter from his mother one wintry day telling him that she could not get along without him any longer. It came as a great shock and was an overwhelming disappointment to him. He took the semester exams and reluctantly packed up his books and belongings, including his mandolin and beloved tennis racket, and the thought of leaving college again was repugnant to him. He came home with a heavy heart. Didn't God want him for one of his servants after all, he wondered? 40 years later, he found that he did. In the meantime, he would not desert God. He would work diligently in his kingdom wherever he was and patiently wait. God would not let him down, he was sure of that. And if he needed him in the ministry, Lloyd knew he would find out in God's own time and way. So now we find him back on the farm in the spring of 1917. In the fall of that year, he bought his first car, a Model T Ford touring car from Amos Menzier of Benton Harbor for $300. He worked the farm all during the next summer, too, although his country was engaged in a war to make the world safe for democracy, and most of his friends and neighbor boys were involved in it. Because he was needed on the farm as the sole support of his family, he had been classified as 4A, but all during the summer of 1918, Lloyd had felt uneasy about this, and was finally impelled to enlist in the service of his country. He had such a strong urge to do so that nothing could repress it. When he told his mother how he felt, she did not object, and did nothing to hinder him. Accordingly, in September of 1918, he signed away his 4A classification and enlisted in the United States Army. The government, though through the draft board, called for 8 men from Barron County to attend the engineering school at the University of Michigan. Lloyd was one of the 8 to volunteer and went to Ann Arbor with the group. After 2 weeks, he had the opportunity of going into the officers' training school, and upon making application, he was sent to the officers' training camp at Camp Grant, Illinois. With the completion of this course, which would be consummated on December 15th, he would be a second lieutenant. But on November 11th, 1918, the armistice was signed, and the war ended. School now being interrupted, the men had the privilege of being discharged at once, or of staying on for another 6 weeks. Lloyd signed up to stay, but at the expiration of this date, they added another 6 months, and he decided that since the country was now at peace, he was no longer obligated to remain in the army. He also felt that he was needed at home. He was now in his 25th year, and was beginning to feel that it was time for him to find himself a wife and settle down. He was only being paid $100 a year in his room and board, and surely a man of his age and temperament was entitled to a job with a better prospect. Besides this, he felt a great urge to have a home of his very own. He did not like being a farmer, as he could not see a future in it for him. He determined that this would be his last year on the farm, and that he would start living his own life. Every night he prayed that the right woman for him would come into his life. He wanted to be free when he found her. In the summer of 1919, God answered his prayer and sent Margaret right out of Connecticut, 1,000 miles away, directly into his arms. God led her to Benton Harbor that eventful summer. Both were very sure of that. And through the intervening years, they have been more and more confident of it.